Hi everyone. Today we'll continue looking at the Certified Kubernetes Administrator question bank. Next up is question 2. Question 2 is about ingress configuration, which is essentially our load balancing configuration. So here, first of all, ingress actually is basically a load balancer like Nginx. In our overall cluster, its main responsibility is to provide external services. Because if you deploy a lot of pods, right? If you expose each pod's interface to provide services externally one by one, it actually becomes quite troublesome. So the main purpose of ingress is that after we set up complex deployments, we can unify things, meaning we can expose the content of multiple pods under a specified domain name or path. That's the main function of ingress. So here, the main requirements of this question are about the following. First, it needs to create a resource. Secondly, there are requirements regarding the port. Here, we need to use port 8080. Next, we need to expose our service under the specified domain name. Here, you need to pay attention to the fact that the question specifies the ingress name, the name of the people's livelihood space, as well as the port, the URL path. And finally, after we execute the task, it should return a hello world message. There are 4 or 5 requirements here as well. So next, let's go through them one by one and see how to handle each specifically. First of all, you need to make sure that if you want to start working on the second question, you must check and confirm that you've completed the first question without any issues. After you exit, then move on to the next one. Host. You can see the requirements here. Take a look at this. This is the first question. For the second question, the 2 questions are done by connecting to different topics. So after you finish the first question here, you should first exit the environment for the first question, then enter the environment for the second question before continuing with the operations. Here, everyone needs to pay attention, make sure you don't, after finishing the first question, just do the second question directly in the environment for the first question. That won't work. The instructions for each question specify that you must complete each one in the designated environment. During the exam, make sure to read carefully where you are supposed to perform the task. Wherever it tells you to go, use our remote connection to connect to that environment before you start answering the question. Everyone, please pay attention to this. Next, let's take a look at how to configure our load balancing. First, check the requirements in the question and see which node you're supposed to go to, and let's go there first. Let's go into this node first. Now, I've already exited. Just now, we were in the environment for the first question, right? This is the environment for the first question. After we exit, it will prompt us that the first question's environment is shutting down. Once it's closed, we then enter the environment for the second question. For the second environment, it is this. Of course, you don't need to remember this. Just look at the requirements of the questions during the exam. And when you're practicing, actually, this matter. The instructions are already included in the question itself, tells you which site to go to for practice and to work on the problem. So when you're practicing, you can do this. Since in the question bank, both the answers and the questions are together, right? You can take a screenshot of just the question and put it in a separate document, okay? When you're practicing on your own, if you feel you've practiced enough and want to go through everything as a whole, you can take these screenshots and then you just look at this. Right? Just look at the question and work on it. That's all you need to do. As for these main node questions, they're also included in the question itself. All right, so first, let's enter the node required for our second question. Okay, once we're in, let's move on to the next step. So what do we do next? First of all, according to the question, we are required to create an ingress. So should we use a command here or should we use a file? For this part, first, we can use command to query the current one now. Ingress information. There is one at the moment, right? There's currently one entry. Within this information, is what we're basically going to, the content that needs to be modified. So first, how do we start? Well, first, our one, a command to simply enter the file that we want to edit. Let's go in first, okay? So here's the thing. That's it. Right now, this is our current one. Ingress name is what it is. This is the current name. But what does the assignment require? The requirement in the assignment is different from what we have here. So this one definitely can't be used directly. It can't be used as is. So what can you do about it? Well, first, how can you do this? First, let's use an editor to enter our file. Go into the file first, and then start creating our ingress. Actually, there isn't much content in this file basically. You just need to write some basic stuff. So first, let's specify the version number. The version number and type are fixed. Just remember them. Of course, you can look them up if needed. You can do this through you can use a command to check the specific version number of this resource to look up the resource's version number. Of course, after you've done this a few times, you'll remember it. And once you're familiar with it, you won't need to look it up anymore. This is fixed and cannot be changed. Every service has its own version number and type. The type here is usually just the name of your service. Pay attention to case sensitivity. Careful with uppercase and lowercase letters. Alright, these are our first, second, and third parts. Actually, when we write the entire YAML file ourselves, it's mainly made up of 4 parts. If you're not very familiar with the syntax here, I can briefly explain it to everyone. After we get into this YAML file, it's mainly made up of 4 parts. The version and type are the first 2 parts. And these are pretty simple, just a single line each. And they're fixed. Every service has its own version and type. The next 2 parts are metadata and detailed information. Metadata mainly deals with naming issues. And this section usually doesn't contain much content. Alright, next let's look at the third part, metadata. In the metadata section, the main thing we do is define the name. So what was the requirement for the name in the question just now? Right, there's a requirement. What should it be called? In the question, we use this specific name. Of course, in practice, you just need to follow whatever the question asks for. Actually, you can name it anything here, right? Because the parameters themselves aren't important. What's important is that everyone remembers the overall syntax structure, how to write this file. Its structure, syntax, symbol, spaces, and indentation. So the parameters are actually the least important part. The parameters are the least important. Here, let's start by writing the name first. So first, we specify the name of our ingress and which namespace it exists in. This is also specified in our assignment, right? It's specified in the assignment. Next, the following part. So what is it? It's just generally speaking, for most resources, by this point, it's pretty much done. For most resources, as long as you specify a name and a namespace, you can usually move on to writing the detailed information. But our service here is a bit specialized as an ingress. It's used for reverse proxy and load balancing. So here, what do we need? We need to specify a bit more. We have an issue with specifying a path here because we're using Nginx for load balancing. So in this case, we need to set that up. What exactly do we need to specify? Here, everyone should pay attention to the indentation. These 3 are at the same level, and then the specific details to be specified next are separated. This line is just a comment, just this. This one. This line is a comment, and what does it comment on? The content of the comment is about our path rewrite rule. It's meant to redirect the request URL path to our root directory. So redirecting to our root path is our basic requirement. So first, what we write here is the rewrite rule for the index ingress as well as lettuce. rewrite the rules. So where do we rewrite it to? We specify as the root. The slash here represents our root directory. Of course, this root directory is not the system's root directory. Here, it refers to the root directory of our website site root directory. All right, this is our metadata information. Generally, for metadata, just the first 2 lines with the name and namespace are enough. For this ingress, it's a bit special. We need to add a comment. Okay, up to this point, we've completed the 3rd part. Next is the 4th part, which mainly concerns what detailed information are we talking about? It's about what content we configure inside this ingress. Here, we need to write it out in detail. There are a few points specified in the prompt that we haven't finished yet, so we'll complete them here. So first, the first step. We need to write down the name we found in the previous step. Let's first write down the name we just looked up. Which step? It's the name we just found, as we saw earlier. We need to reference this resource, which means specifying the ingress controller class we are using. So here, first we use, pay attention here. Just like when you're playing games, be careful. Usually when you see a capital letter later on, it means the next word starts with a capital letter, but the first one is generally lowercase. Of course, that's just the usual case if there are exceptions. Just remember them as they come. All right. So here we first specify the ingress controller class mentioned above. Next, the specific rules. We need to specify our domain name and information like the path, domain name, path, port number, service, and so on. So the first thing we write here is the domain name specifically, the domain name required by the question. The only downside here is that, well, when you're working on this part, you need to pay attention to the length. 2 spaces are optimal, 2 spaces are best. Here, we specify the host name, which is actually the domain name. To be precise, it's the domain name. Using host name isn't quite appropriate. It's best to use domain name. If you want to specify domain name, you do it here. Add the domain name specified in the question here. For example, .52g. Okay, this is the domain name specified in our question. Next, let's take a look at the specific content, which is our proxy content. Besides the domain name in the question, there's another requirement, which is about the path. That is, we need to match a path prefix according to the path specified in the question. So here's the situation. Because this question doesn't actually provide us with any certificate-related information, what we're setting up here is an HTTP type ingress. As you know, there are 2 types of ingress, the standard version and the encrypted version. Since we haven't been given any certificates or certificate requirements, we can just use the standard version. So it's the HTTP protocol. Now let's write out the specific path. The path required in the question is this path, right? That's what's required in the question. All right, after we've written out this path, what can we do next? Well, we can go ahead and write the specific related content, namely the service and port information. We'll also need to make sure to specify the service and the port next. Here, of course, let's first complete the full pass. There's still one thing missing from the pass. Path type, the path type is prefix. Yes, the prefix type. Then what? Next, we define the backend service. Well, the backend service is like this. There are actually 2 points in the requirements we provide. One point is the name of the backend slice, the service name, and the port number. I have 2 port numbers, so here we define it. The name of Switzerland. The name, so here it is. Just follow the requirements given in your assignment. Do it according to the instructions. Next is the port number. We also have a specified port number, right? There is a specific requirement for it. Port 8080 is a bit special. Normally, of course, this depends on what kind of service it actually is. Port 8080, right? Generally, it's used more often by the Tomcat service. Alright, after we specify the port here, this basically completes our configuration. Do you need to check? Actually, you don't need to check. If we come across a question that requires writing a relatively long YML file, after you finish writing the answer, you can just save, exit, and run it directly. No need to check. There's no point wasting time. If you wrote it correctly, it will pass in one go. If you made a mistake, running it is the fastest way to check. If you just stare at it yourself, you might not spot which symbol is wrong even after a long time. But by running it, you can immediately see exactly where the error is. For example, I actually hope it throws an error here, so I can show everyone what an error message looks like overall. So, where's this error being thrown? It says there's a problem with the version in one of our files. What version? When it comes to the version, it actually only involves one file, which is the very first line at the top, just this first line. So, there's an issue with this first line at the top. Where exactly is the problem? We can take a look and compare the version number, as well as the name that comes after the version. Here, we can take a closer look at the specific details on this side. This includes the version and the type, specifically as provided in the list below. The error here is about... Oh, it's not about the version type. What it's referring to is this part right here. In the inquest, there's an unknown parameter. Where is it unknown? It's in the rules section within the details. The host details are here, right? The rules are here, and the host is hero. There's an extra S's. So rules here is plural, but host is not. The reason is if you need to write multiple ingress rules, since this is plural, right? Rules is plural, so you can specify multiple hosts. You can write multiple hosts. Each host here represents one. Reverse proxy rule, a load balancing rule. If you have a second one, you just need to add a second host here. So host is singular, while rules is plural, because you can write multiple rules under rules. Please pay attention here. This is actually an example of an error, a kind of error message. It looks like this, and tells you, hey, where the problem is. Usually you can take a look sometimes. If it's a syntax issue, it might tell you exactly which line is problematic. But in cases like this, it's actually not a syntax problem. What kind of issue is it? Right? It's because you wrote the option incorrectly, the option is wrong. When I talk about syntax issues, I mainly mean things like spaces or colons, right? These are issues with symbols. In this case, it's actually because we wrote the option name incorrectly, which causes this kind of error. After we fix it here, it should execute successfully. As long as it's created successfully, what does that mean? It means your syntax and all your options are correct. The only thing worth paying attention to is the parameters. Really, the only thing to watch out for is the parameters. So how do we check them here? We check by accessing what exactly? Just access the path required in our question. Right? If you can get the result with the hello world smiley face, then there's no problem. Okay, that's our second question. Take note. Our parameters must be correct. The good thing about this question is that as long as your final validation is fine, basically the parameters are correct, there won't be any issues. Why is that? Because if even one parameter is wrong, you won't be able to access it. All of these parameters are connected to your final result. This is different from the previous question. Here, as long as you get the correct result, it means all your previous parameters are correct. If the result is wrong, go back and check your parameters. Alright, that's our second question. Remember to exit properly. Okay, so this is our second question. If you need the complete question bank, you can leave a comment below. Use the highest price to purchase the most comprehensive question bank. That's all for today. Goodbye, everyone.